In my opinion, it's a very powerful poem that points out the injustice experienced by a black working class person. Through this poem, we can clearly see perpetuation of the cruelty in the post-colonial era, and it gives us an insight into what's going on emotionally, politically, and historically under the surface. The poem also reflects the hard conditions that the working class members experience, especially in the so-called second and third world countries, irrespective of their race, culture, and identity. In that sense, we can replace England with any exploitative and oppressive power. It might be interpreted as a representative there. Linton Kwesi Johnson, born in 1952, is a Jamaican British poet, musician, and political activist. In 1963, at the age of 11, he arrived in England. When he arrived, he was disappointed because it was not as it had been mentioned in Jamaica. It was depressive and not paved with gold. Everything was grey as opposed to Jamaica. At 17, he joined the Black Panthers, a political organization founded to challenge police brutality. He was influenced by writers such as Frantz Fanon and Eric Williams. During those formative years, Johnson discovered books written by and about black people, which he found exhilarating. His unique contributions to literature led to his recognition and publication in the prestigious Penguin Modern Classic series, making him the first black poet being published there. As the founder of dub poetry in the 1970s, he influenced a generation of writers and became a cultural icon. Linton Kwesi Johnson coined the term dub poetry, which originated from the performance poetry of Jamaican origin. It evolved out of dub music consisting of spoken word over reggae rhythms. Johnson believed that performing the poems would be more effective in reaching a wider audience than solely publishing poetry books. This particular style of poetry predominantly centers around political and social issues. Johnson uses the Creole language as a way of resistance to the norms imposed by the powerful. The intention was to distort British English. Therefore, his indigenous identity or language is utilized as a post-colonial weapon to decolonize the minds and to harm British English as imperialist forces did to their land. With its filthy words and aggressive tone, the poem England is a Beach reflects the necessity of their labor under challenging conditions and their anger against this systemic discrimination. He uses the rich oral tradition and rhythmic music of Jamaican culture to utter the problems of his immigrant fellows in a very Jamaican way. He says, "I could relate it, my poetry, in a sense, to my idea of what the real African tradition was. In terms of telling the story of the tribe, I wanted to draw upon my Jamaican heritage, use the everyday language of Jamaican speech. I was also heavily influenced by dub. I wanted my verse, the actual words, to sound like music, to sound like a bass line. So when I was talking, I wanted to use my voice like a talking bass. And that's how I developed my style as well as my poetics." I think the lines are relatively straightforward and clear to understand if the Creole is left aside. The poem contains political and social messages such as exploitation, discrimination, underclass difficulties, and modern slavery. Dramatic monologue is used throughout the poem in order to express the victimization of a black individual. Johnson presents an African individual's working life after immigrating to England. Despite working diligently, he cannot earn enough to be able to get by. In a way, the speaker is a paid slave and nothing more. In the end, he gets old, and the capital owners do not need him anymore, and he is made redundant even though they have enough job areas. The poem begins with the oppressive working conditions of the narrator's early days in England. The word underground is repeated in this very first sentence, and it is where he is working. So this might suggest that there is an absence of windows and anything related to the outside world. He is alienated from the outside world due to the working place. It can also be said that he is lost and there is no one to help him in this big city. We can especially understand this from the fourth line. He says, "You don't get to know your way around." From this first stanza, there is a desperate tone in the speaker, and it does not get any better in the subsequent ones. The speaker keeps addressing the working conditions as a black individual and the price for being different in the motherland. He talks about being a proper employee, highlighting, "I didn't turn clock watcher." As in the myth of the American dream, he toils and reflects a dedication to his job despite the unfavorable circumstances. However, it doesn't work, of course, and he emphasizes the cruelty of modern slavery and says he cannot even earn enough to get by, and that is why he has sleepless nights. The speaker also underlines the stereotypical ideology or fixity of black people and states the label of laziness attributed to black men. Even though he worked in various labor works and had only a little leisure, he is blamed for laziness due to his race. In the last stanzas, he mentions his situation in his older years. There is a master-slave relationship between the employer and the black employee. So the employers do not care about him, leaving him in despair. After the 15 years of working at the factory, they fire him, probably due to being perceived as slow or not profitable enough. There will always be someone who will replace him as he is not seen as a human being. There is a refrain after every stanza, and every refrain ends with a different claim. I wanted to group them in the end because I think they are the most remarkable part of this poem. By repeating England is a beach, in this poem, England is not romanticized but harshly criticized as a prison that lures and confines people from other lands. Also, the motherland is known as caring and feels belonging to the black people in Africa, so it is disappointing to turn her back to her black children and leave them in misery in England. That is why the motherland is called beach here. In these first two refrains, the poet also suggests that there is no escaping or no chance to hide from this exploitation. He is a pet slave, and he knows that he has to accept the situation to be able to survive. In the last line of the third refrain, as he states in a previous stanza, the speaker again mentions his honesty. Says, "It is no lie that I'm telling a truth." By saying this, I mean the reason might be the internalization of the inferiority or the position that the mainstream society places him. He has the feeling of proving himself by saying this. In the last lines of the following refrain, he emphasizes the hardship of surviving in England. The poem ends with a provocative question. Says, "England is a beach for true, but what are we gonna do about it?"